Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Felicité Fairer-Wessles from the Department of Tourism Management from the University of Pretoria, South Africa. I'll be talking to you about the paradox of poverty amidst the plenty of nature, which involves community involvement and the empowerment for sustainable tourism development. Our context today is the iSimangaliso Wetland Park. As you can see, this is Africa, and on the eastern seaboard, where the red dot is the iSimangaliso Wetland Park. This is a close-up of the area. It consists of 220 kilometers along the Indian Ocean and about 300,000 hectare. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was proclaimed in 1909 as the St. Lucia Wetland Park, and the name was changed in 2003 to iSimangaliso Wetland Park, which means a miracle in isiZulu, which is the vernacular. The park consists of 2 marine protected areas with 5 unique ecosystems, as well as 4 Ramsar sites, which are the St. Lucia Bay system, the turtle beaches or coral reefs of Tongaland, the Cozy Bay Lake system, and Lake Sibaya. Together with this, it has a 700-year-old fishing tradition. This is a picture of the traditional fish traps at Cozy Bay Estuary. As you can see, they look like big seas, and they are still used by the local communities. Now, the iSimangaliso Authority, which I will call IA from now on, manages the site according to the South African World Heritage Convention Act and the World Heritage Convention and the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. And iSimangaliso Authority represents all major stakeholders, including local communities. Now, their aim is to alleviate poverty, to promote development in the rural villages that has been described as a paradox of poverty amidst the plenty of nature. And to do this, they will do this by ensuring empowerment activities that include ownership, economic growth, training, and building the existing tourism market, all in line with the Millennium Development Goals, Goal 1, which is the eradicating of poverty and hunger, and Goal 7, ensuring environmental sustainability. Now, the aim of this study was to investigate this paradox of poverty versus plenty, and a pilot study was done to determine the level of engagement and empowerment of selected local communities adjacent to the iSimangaliso Wetland Park within the context of sustainable tourism development. And the objectives of this pilot study were to explore ownership and land issue claims, awareness and protection of the wetland, the availability of funding and job opportunities, the accessibility to the site and tourism impacts, access to information, and the importance of education and training. Now, the methodology that was used, this was a qualitative pilot study using focus groups and in-depth interviews. The target population were adults from areas adjacent to the iSimangaliso Wetland Park, and the sampling was done. Firstly, the focus groups were male and female adults using non-probability convenience sampling, and the in-depth interviews were done with stakeholders also using non-probability but purposive sampling, where we were looking at information-rich individuals from the community. The instrument that was used was an interview schedule to direct the discussions, and that I refer back to the objectives on the previous slide. Now, the data was collected with the 2 focus groups, 2 groups of adults from Matubatuba area, that is more or less in the middle of the St. Lucia Park, in areas Gilonki, where there were 8 adults, and Yalazi, where there were 27 adults, totaling 35 adults. And the in-depth interviews were with 13 information-rich adults, which included senior educators, community elders, people from the iSimangaliso Authority, Mzvelo, KZN Wildlife, the Department of Forestry and Fisheries. And these 13 in-depth interviews were held across the whole park from north to south, from Matubatuba, St. Lucia, Mambwaze, Bangwizwe, and Kwanwawashe areas, which is right up in the north. Now, the first objective was to look at ownership and land claims. Now, land claimant communities are the descendants of the original inhabitants of this piece of land. And the iSimangaliso Authority is responsible for implementing settlement and co-management agreements, and they have facilitated major land claims already. However, none of the respondents in this pilot study were from communities involved with land claims, so we could not really address that particular objectives. The second one was awareness and protection of the wetland, and it was found that the community in general agrees that the wetland is important, but not their responsibility to protect it. And looking at the in-depth interviews, the stakeholders realized the need for relevant skills and information to empower the community so that they can learn to take responsibility for protecting of the wetland. Another objective was job opportunities, and here we looked at the particular Mabaso-Mabila case study. These are two communities living on Lake Sibaya, the Mabaso community and the Mabila community. The Mabaso community had a tourism development in terms of a houseboat that was built for them, and Baya camp was built for the Mabila community. But these two communities came into conflict with one another because the income generated was too small to support both the communities. So the Mabila group sank the houseboat of the other group, and the Mabaso group told all kinds of stories to the workers at the Baya camp, and they actually all left the camp and looked for jobs in the urban areas. So it's actually quite a tragic case where rural communities want immediate direct monetary benefits from tourism. And because they've been living a subsistence or survival lifestyle for so many centuries, they feel that the responsibility for any problem lies with somebody else. And they feel that if something does not work, it is not their fault, but that the authorities are responsible or the tourism developers. So it is a problematic issue in terms of job opportunities for such rural communities. Here are just two pictures. The one is the sunken houseboat at Lake Sibaya, and the other one is Baya Camp, which is absolutely deserted at this point. Now, one of the other objectives is accessibility to the site and tourism impacts on the communities. And we're looking in particular at the Sodwana Bay National Park, which is more or less in the middle of the iSimangaliso Wetland Park. A previous Minister of Tourism in South Africa put a ban on the use of 4x4 vehicles on Sodwana Beach due to the pressure on the natural resource base, because people were driving with their 4x4s onto the beach and were actually ruining the natural resource. But this caused tensions between the local communities and the local conservation authority, because the conservation authority wanted to protect the beaches, but the local communities were deprived of income because they were actually doing all kinds of jobs for the domestic tourists that would come to this area. And when this beach was actually closed off, where tourists couldn't use 4x4s, a lot of domestic tourists cancelled their reservations, and this caused a massive loss of income to the locals. And more or less at the same time, the child labor law was instituted, which prohibited youngsters younger than 16 years to do informal employment for the tourists, such as camp duties or au pairing for the children. And this was also resulted in a loss of income. And subsequently, there was the increase of theft, drug abuse, and prostitution in the area, which is most unfortunate. These are just two pictures of the Sodwana Bay National Park, where you can see where the automobiles actually driven right into the sea, where the people do deep sea fishing and scuba diving, and it does actually ruin the natural resource. These are some pictures of the local tourism activity in the area. The one to the right are men cleaning fish that they then sell. On this top left one are where a lot of woven baskets and woven materials that can be sold. And the bottom one is fast food, normally fish-related food that is sold on a fast food basis to tourists. Now, one of the other objectives is the availability of information. And here we found that the men in the community, which included the elders, those are the older men, and the indunas, which are called the the men with authority in a community. The men are provided with information through the Department of Forestries and Fisheries and Mzembelo KZN Wildlife with regard to farming, and they get this information through face-to-face contact with the authorities, and they get it through pamphlets, but pamphlets are of little use because most of the elders, of the men, the adult men, are illiterate. And it's very much a patriarchal society where the men are provided with information, but women, on the other hand, receive no information from the authorities, such as the Department of Forests and Fisheries. They obtain information through female face-to-face information sharing, where one woman would gain information from maybe her husband and share it with the other woman. And this was particularly evident in a study we did right up in the north with women mussel harvesters, where women were quite ignorant in terms of when they should harvest the mussels, and then they would trample the mussel beds, and that would cause no mussel harvest, which was actually a very big problem because they use the mussels for own survival and to sell. And we're actually contemplating a study where the women can use their mobile phones and be informed in terms of relevant information. So it was found that there was a huge divide between males and females in terms of relevant information made available. Now, finally, we look at the importance of education and training of community members, and all respondents felt that many irrelevant school subjects were taught in the area. Agriculture, for example, was taught, but this was an agriculturally poor area. No attempt to incorporate subjects such as tourism, office management, Western-style housekeeping skills, or home economics were included. Although we did find that there were some nature clubs at school that the children and the teachers felt were important, which is important in terms of sustainability and of the environment's protection. Another problem was that there was the appointment of many unqualified school teachers in the area. And the community felt that the authorities are responsible for this. And the responsible authorities in terms of education and training were, for example, the Department of Education and Department of Environmental Affairs. And the community thought that ward councillors and indunas, those are community elders, should influence the authorities to take charge of this problem. There was also no skills training for community members to replace, for example, overfishing. Found, if you look, remember the traditional fish traps, a lot of overfishing is occurring at the moment because there's not proper control. A lot of licensing is needed, but even if there is licensing, somebody's got to control the licensing. And a lot of wood is cut for a lot of the male adults do wood carving to sell to tourists, but eventually there will be nothing left in the forest. So all adults need to be trained in terms of other skills to replace these that are actually using up the natural resource base. So the results in terms of needing to empower communities, the dissemination of information is very important. And the elders, the male elders, the amakosi or the indunas as they call them, can be used as community information providers to verbally disseminate information and to walk the talk, which means to walk amongst the people in the community and spread the relevant information. Because it's an oral society, a lot of information is given out orally. Information dissemination also in terms of the Department of Forests and Fisheries and Mzembelo Wildlife for relevant information to empower and engage the communities to collectively, that is males and females, to follow sustainable tourism practices. So the dissemination of information is very important from the authorities to the community and within the community using the amakosi or the indunas. And then, of course, education and training in terms of responsible tourism to empower the communities through various programs. There are a few programs run by the government, such as Working for Water or Working for Fire, where people are trained with certain skills to look after the water resource, to put out fires, for example, but they also need skills to control the overfishing. They need skills to, for example, organize heritage festivals, because these communities have a lot of very rich festivals that can be tourism related and that can be used on a long-term basis. So we must remember that tourist developments are small in scale and can only in part contribute to the socioeconomic situation of communities and are not the primary solution to the upliftment of an entire community. And this is something that the community itself must also realize. So transparent collaboration, engagement and empowerment of and between communities, authorities and all stakeholders is essential for tourism development, but this remains a challenge. We need to look at some of the limitations of this pilot study, certain objectives that have not been met. For example, we need to interview stakeholders in the tourism sector to identify possibilities in terms of job creation through partnerships, market access, expanding businesses, as well as advice and support from tourism stakeholders to community members, as well as to interview local and regional authorities in terms of funding opportunities. And this underlies Millennium Goal number 1. It was also found or felt that too few respondents were surveyed in the pilot, although this is a pilot, as there are more than 1,000 people, 100,000 people living in the area. But this pilot can inform future research towards a stratified survey engaging all communities adjacent to the iSimangaliso Wetland Park. But the question is, will this deliver much more information? In general, there's a lack of research amongst the total population of resident communities adjacent to the iSimangaliso Wetland Park. So in conclusion, this pilot has attempted to address sustainable development within the paradox of poverty, which is Millennium Goal 1, amidst the social-cultural dimension, the well-being of the local community, which includes respect for a collective heritage and cultural identity, food and shelter, and health through education. So you can address poverty through education, and the economic dimension, which is the generation of job opportunities, also through education, skills, and wealth. And the second is to address sustainable development within the plenty of nature, which is Millennium Development Goal 7, the so-called environmental dimension, recognizing the importance of conservation of all natural resources, empowering communities in terms of environmental understanding through skills training. So at the end of the day, skills training and education is imperative, all of course within a stable political environment. Empowering the community and especially its children is crucial, as they are the future, to live collectively and sustainably amidst the plenty of nature. Thank you very much.